if I had to guess, I'd say that this is going to be the mode that you guys are most familiar with. Persuasive argumentative is more than likely, was at least covered in part in high school, whether you knew it or not. And it's the one we use the most in college. At its core, writing a persuasive argumentative paragraph or essay, either way, is about defending what you think or explaining why you think the way that you do. So the goals here are to convince your reader that your perspective is valid, to encourage a reader to take a certain action or a point of view, to use evidence to make a logical argument, and to take a stance and explain why you think or feel that way. So some main strategies for this type of writing are what we've talked about since the beginning. IPA, introduce, present, and analyze. And in fact, like many English teachers, or at least the English teachers at the college level, really everything I've been teaching all semester is geared toward helping you write effective, persuasive, or argumentative writing. Compare and contrast is another main strategy. We talked about that as a mode of its own, but it's actually more often used in making arguments. So you might compare and contrast one position with another or one piece of evidence with another. So a common strategy is to look at your perspective and then compare that with the counter argument, what someone who would disagree with you would say. That is a form of compare and contrast. Another way it often takes the form in writing is maybe you see a piece of evidence, a piece of data, and you might say, well, at first glance, this looks pretty convincing, but when you look deeper, here's why it's not. You also will more than likely use appeals to convince your reader of your perspective, and this is why I've combined persuasive and argumentative together. Really, persuasive is more about using pathos, and argumentative is more about using logos. They both use ethos, but in a really good piece of writing, more than likely, you're going to use some emotion. You're going to try to get your reader to see things from your perspective, or you're going to have a hook that's going to draw the reader in emotionally or something like that. And you're also going to use logical arguments. So it makes more sense to combine the two modes because you probably will use both of them in most forms of writing. So the structure is going to seem really familiar. It's something we've talked about a lot already. For your body paragraphs, you will have a topic sentence, then your exposition, your transition sentence. The thesis statement or topic sentence should have an arguable claim and should present the main evidence. In the case of the thesis statement, the main evidence for the paper as a whole, and in the case of the topic sentence, the main category of evidence for that paragraph. Your exposition, you're going to introduce your evidence, present your evidence, and analyze your evidence. And your transition sentence in your body paragraph, you'll restate the claim and evidence and explain why it matters. The transition, what applies here for the transition sentence also applies for the conclusion. Really, that's what you're going to do in your conclusion. Restate the evidence, explain why it matters. So some prompts. Most college writing is in these pairs of modes. Some signal words you might look at are explain, consider, relate, opinion, think, why or why not. If you see those words, more than likely you are looking at a persuasive argumentative assignment. And questions. A lot of times prompts for persuasive argumentative are in questions. So what do you think of? What do you make of? How do you feel about? Those sorts of things are asking you to make a claim. I feel X. And then explain why, which is how you find your thesis statement. So reversing the prompt, prompts will pretty much always ask you to take a stance, for especially persuasive, but for both persuasive and argumentative. So the first thing you want to do is decide what side you're on. And then you start your sentence with your stance. So example, do you think that uniforms should be required in school? Why or why not? So you'll see I bolded think, why or why not, and the fact that it's a question. Because those words signal me in that this is persuasive, argumentative, so then I'll just kind of reverse that. Uniforms should not be required in high school because, and so that would of course be my stance. Then I want to do some quick pre-writing. So what are some reasons that I can think of to fill in the blanks in the last step? And you want to come up with at least 3 and think about how those reasons support your claim. And so I'm just making a quick list. Is probably the easiest thing to do here, although it can be helpful, especially when you involve research, to do a full outline later. Other types do work here as well, like mind maps can be effective. T-charts can be effective. Venn diagrams can be effective. So whatever kind of pre-writing works for you, it really can work for this type of writing. So then you'll fill in the blanks to create your thesis statement. So the general form of a thesis statement, as we've kind of talked about already, is X equals A plus B plus C. Claim X is valid because evidence A, B, and C. So for example, if we're looking at, do you think that uniforms should be required in high school? Why or why not? Then my stance, my claim, is uniforms should not be required in high school, which is X, because, and then A is they stifle student creativity, B is they place an unnecessary financial burden on families, and C is they discourage students from developing a unique sense of self. So topic sentences should state the topic of the paragraph and relate it back to the thesis. So for example, if I'm looking at the thesis from the last slide, an example topic sentence for A, for my first body paragraph, might be, requiring uniforms in schools discourages creativity among students. So you can just see that that's kind of restating the claim and A. Then you'll write your exposition. This should look familiar at this point. You'll have one paragraph, generally, for each of your main points in your thesis. So point A, your topic sentence, introduce, present, analyze, transition sentence. Point B, topic sentence, introduce, present, analyze, transition sentence. Point C, topic sentence, introduce, present, analyze, and transition sentence. In this type of writing, the biggest mistake, or biggest opportunity that students have is assuming that the evidence on its own is enough. You have to explain why you feel the way you do, or you have to explain how it connects back to your thesis, or how the evidence supports what you're saying. So you can use evidence, logic, or emotion to support your points, but all evidence should connect back to the thesis and topic sentence. And really, other people should be able to disagree with you, right? Because you're trying to persuade someone, you're trying to argue something, and there's no need to argue it if everyone already agrees with you. So other people should be able to disagree with what you've said, but you still want to make the argument as strong as possible to make that as hard on them as you can. So if you get stuck, especially when you're trying to write the transition sentence or the analyze step, ask, does my evidence support my claim? Why did I include this piece of evidence? What do I want the reader to learn or think, or how do I want the reader to react? Then to write the transition sentence, you basically just paraphrase your thesis statement or your topic sentence and add the reason why it's important. So some things you might consider are what consequences come from the other perspective or the counter argument, what should the reader do after reading this, or how do you want the reader to react? And that goes for the conclusion as well. The transition sentence, we'll be looking at it just on the level of a single topic in a paragraph. The transition sentence, or the conclusion, looks at the whole topic as a whole, but they are pretty similar. So you may want to check this resource out that looks at examples of argumentative language and can kind of help you to develop better transitions and stronger argumentative writing. So it's worth looking at. So for the introduction, all the types of hooks we've talked about are useful here, but a couple that are particularly useful are startling facts, because that already shows that you've done your research and it stimulates the reader's sense of curiosity to propel them forward, and stating a commonly held view and then refuting it. So you may have heard that X is bad for you, but the truth is that it can actually be good for you. You might have heard that drinking water, it's impossible to drink too much water, but it is possible to end up causing damage from overconsumption of water. Things like that. I didn't put it here because it can be dicey, but anecdotes can also be good if they're closely relevant to the topic at hand. So in the context step, which is right after the hook and before the thesis, you'll want to explain the issue that you're talking about, provide some background information, and define terms that might be unfamiliar to readers. It's going to depend on your topic how much of each of those you include. Sometimes you might, maybe just need one sentence for each. Sometimes you might need to go a little bit further. And in really long research papers and scholarly articles, it's not unusual to have more like an introductory section, where you might have an introduction that's 3 or 4 paragraphs long, because there's so much of this to do. But in the ones that you're going to be looking at, or the papers you're going to be writing, this section probably won't be more than 3 or 4 sentences. So in your conclusion, as always, you want to restate the thesis and main points, and then use your so what statement. So again, explain why it matters, what's at stake, or include a call to action. It's very similar to the transition sentence slide before. So I'm going to stop this recording now because we're at about the 10-minute mark, and then we'll look at an example thesis statement and a paragraph briefly. Give me just a moment and I'll be right back with you with it.